aggressively intelligent. For you people out of town, this is still not for showing in your local stations. This is just tweaks us still. I'm going on a few more days. And for you people in the other cities who have just begun attending the collective private showings, I'll repeat from last time we met that I'm sort of doing a history of what this has been about, and specifically I was throwing in what I had done in this lifetime, and remind you people who are not aware of the fact that even though I'm going to be talking some about what I've done, don't get your hopes up. You're not going to learn anything about me. So don't begin to drool and think, well, finally. Now, the only reason I'm doing it's obvious. I'm telling you something about how this operates out in life and what I've done, etc., and how it is applicable to history. But last time I mentioned that the first thing on all, we'll go ahead and call them mystics, people who get involved with this to such a degree that they become either publicly known or they actually become on their own and you wouldn't know it. But all of them, including the public ones, the first thing the mystic realizes very early, he realizes that the nature of life in man's mind, the intellectual life of man, is as mechanical as every other part of human existence. This is not ordinarily perceived by man. The results of it, the reality of it, is dealt with, which is the reason that men take the world of civilization, which is simply the physical manifestation of man's intellectual world, is why men take it, why men defend it so, why men have such great fears over its fragility, because they are correct. And many times I've made up stories and tales and made comments, even with my warning to the public that it was not criticism, but to point out how fragile life is. I have in fact just pointed out to you that it is invented vis-a-vis, or CF'd, to man's physical existence, because you are born obviously with a physical nature and the need to survive if you are genetically sane enough to try and survive. And there is nothing actually invented. In fact, if you start inventing in the area having to do with human existence, physical existence, it normally begins to even be realized as being self-destructive and even labeled as perverted, because there's nothing to invent. Compared to that, man's intellectual world is invented. And even though, as I said, it is not discussed and men do not take it into account, contraire, the saner you are, the more ordinarily mechanical you are, the less you will take it into account. The more you will rail at the fact, if you heard someone try and say that man's intellectual life, individually and collectively, is as mechanical as the, if there is such a thing, the mental activities, the neural activities of a baboon, individually and collectively, is as mechanical as the operations, the flight patterns of a flock of geese. The more sane you are, the more ordinary and middle class you are, the more automatic you are yourself, the more you are a stalwart and a pillar of society, that is civilization, the more you will dismiss that. You go, oh no, 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 as they must do. But I was going to point out, why do men take civilization to be such a fragile affair? As always, the truth is right before you. It doesn't take any great psychological depth bombing. I've just done it for you. Men only defend themselves. Anytime you walk in the bar and holler, I'll whip every dumb son of a bitch in here, whoever turns around and looks at you like, hey, watch it. You don't have to hand out Sanford Binet IQ test. You got your answer. It's always true. It's not some psychological fallacy in men. It is just a fact, and again, it's the kind of thing that is so obvious and blunt that in man's invented intellectual world, it cannot even be taken into account. It is not taken into account. But the reason why men defend civilization verbally, and they will even do so in physical means, or say they are defending that which is non-physical, such as ideologies and religions, which is, as you should know by now, untrue. But at any rate, why do they feel such a need to be fearful of the stability, the longevity, the continued health of civilization? It's because, compared to the fact that they know tomorrow, they will get up and be hungry, and everyone around them will. And they know they can count on the fact that if times got bad, the people next to you will try to steal your food in the next cave. And if you're strong enough, you'll keep your eyes out to see who's smaller than you in case times do get bad. You know you'll go take food. All of that is predictable. There's nothing to think about. Man's invented world is why, in a sense, that it is so open to ridicule, so open to criticism. And if you also begin to see it, is why I've so often kept throwing out the caveats about prefacing some comment I was about to make, to say, now listen, this is not an attack on politicians, this is not an attack on religion. The reason I kept doing that is not to protect me. I don't give a damn what somebody thinks, whether I attack religion or politics. But it's the fact of you people, if you're going to learn something, to realize, again, the mechanical nature of life and how the intellectual world of man must protect itself, that if you take a lemming, if you take a detailing, a picture, a description of life in a way that you never hear it, and if you take it as a criticism, as you're supposed to, well, either that or agree with it, same thing, but if you take it as a criticism rather than just a new observation, then you will not hear anything. And the point is, if you remember, I made up a news item a while back, that one man poked so many holes in life that it was like a big balloon. The damn thing collapsed. That is a fact. If people could hear the kind of comments that a Buddha or Muhammad, or the kind of stuff I keep talking about to you people over the last few years, of apparently just running commentaries on the nature of life and nature of man, if ordinary people did not hear it, or if ordinary people did hear it as criticisms, that I was just some guy on cable TV that had some kind of political agenda of some sort, I had some kind of religious fanaticism hidden away under my little beanie, and that all I was doing was, shaking my fist at some segment of the world, then it's okay, because people will resist it. It does not let the air out of civilization, that is, man's invented world, to those who take a comment, a description of it. If they take it as criticism, it does not let the air out. So that's the danger. Me spending all this time and these continuing and my threats that, well, I'm not going to say it again, that I'm not an attack, and then I'll go ahead and do it again. Because if you hear it in any way as an attack, which your mind will, if you're just using the ordinary collective common state of consciousness, sooner or later I could talk here just 2 or 3 minutes, me or anybody else, but I'm doing it for a specific known reason. I'm doing it willfully, and I even point out that I'm about to use, I'll just be rambling around, I say, all right, I'm about to, let's use politics, or let's use religion as an example. Now I say, well, wait a minute, what I'm going to say, it can sound like, if you're an ordinary person, it can sound like a criticism, but it's not. I just want you to see something, that it's reflected, something unrealized in the operations of life vis-a-vis man, coming out through his institutions, his collective behavior. I go through all of that because if you just listen with ordinary consciousness, we'll assume that half of anything I would say, you speaking about ordinary life, you would take as a criticism. And as long as you take it as a criticism, and let's say you disagree with it, you think, wait a minute, he's speaking on the church again, and I'm a good Catholic, or I'm a religious person, I don't like that. That does not let the air out. It does not lift up the emperor's skirt. You will not learn anything new. The only thing you think you learn new is, well, hey, he's just anti-religion, whoever's making the comment. That's why you cannot ever learn anything as long as you're resisting the mechanical flow of life, as long as you're taking a position. Which if you're ordinary, you're supposed to. That's the only thing that will keep you upright in the normal flow of the river of reality, is that you have to keep taking positions, even if you apparently are drowning or being driven downstream sometimes. That's the only thing that makes a man feel like he's partially sane. They realize, well, it's me, because by God I have opinions, I have certain beliefs, and I got to stick to them. They don't know why, but they've got to stick to them because that's all they've got. It's the same thing as I point out, that the simple, as ordinary people, love to hear their name called. They love to hear it repeated. The simpler they get, if you notice, people even will refer to themselves in the third person. Royalty, politicians are great at that. It's beginning to seep into show business now. Pretty soon, I guess, every person on the street will be referring to themselves anytime they're trying to be serious and bring a bit of apparently solemn attention to themselves, will even speak of themselves in the third person. What I want you to consider is how defensive men are about aspects of civilization. society, culture. But you understand, we're talking about everything above the survival level, everything that springs directly from the level of consciousness and above, the very things based upon thought and word that makes man man. Everything above that, man is, without knowing it, is very concerned with, very protective of, defensive of, frightened about its health. Men are more frightened, if you notice this. Humanity in general, they're more frightened, for instance, bring it right up to date, the idea of crime than they are the actual execution of a crime. You can have a man who has just been mugged, and a reporter interview him, and they say, well, yeah, he took my watch, and etc. And the guy's obviously well dressed enough that whatever money he had on him, if he had any, is not going to hurt him. And he still looks a little shaken. They say, well, I guess it was a harrowing experience. And he said, well, yeah, I wouldn't want to go through it again. And they'll say, well, is there anything we should learn from this? Or do you have anything, what do you have to say? And the man will, if asked or if given a chance, he will go into some. The more civilized he is, the more ordinary middle class is, the more inclined he is to go then into some short sermon bewailing the breakdown of society. That many times they will even say, the man will say, well, now I lost a watch. And I lost my billfold, my credit cards, I've already called and stopped it. So it's no big loss to me personally. And he'll look him right in the camera. He'll go, but what gets me is I have lived here in this city. I grew up here and I can remember. I know when you didn't have to lock the doors at night. And look at it now. This is what frightens me. And it was two teenagers. They looked me dead in the eye. One of them had a pistol. I thought he was going to shoot me. His buddy looked at him like, he gave him a look like, should I shoot him? And it was obvious they didn't have to. I wasn't going to fight them. I'm 60 years old. I'm overweight. I wasn't going to do anything. That's what's frightening, he says. And he's correct. In other words, you understand, individually, personally, he will accept the assault upon himself physically. Well, battery, I guess, instead of assault, but the attack upon himself physically. He will accept the robbery, but he is more concerned over the theory, over the idea, the general notion that everything may break down. And it's well rooted in a sense. It's not going to. But compared to every other aspect of life, it seems very fragile. That it's something that men cannot put their finger on. That's why it is so filled, surrounded by myths and guides and dreams and appeals to higher forces and just every foolish, nonsensical thing you can think of. All of them flow from man's mind, and I was going to point out, in one sense, you can see that they flow from man's mind on the basis that he realizes this whole thing is a bunch of baloney, in a sense. Now, see, that's easy. If I started that, ordinary people, if you were ordinary people, you go, oh, you're one of those probably back to nature, and you're going to start hiring, the whole world's gone to hell since we discovered electricity. No, but isn't that what it sounds like? And that's part of the built-in safety mechanism. That if somebody does begin talking like this in a certain way, or just in one area, even people who don't know what they're doing, if somebody just sort of accidentally tries to make, and does make an objective comment, two people arguing over some idea of, is art important, or why does it taste in art change? How can you tell the difference between this and that? And one guy says, what do you mean, how can you tell the difference? You can't tell the deconstructionist neo-impressionism from the deconstructed neo-expressionism? And the guy who just said that does it like that's important. And the first guy goes, are you crazy? And then a third guy, let's say, happens to come by, and he started making the kind of comment that I might sometime, or just kind of an objective comment like, why are these two people arguing? I mean, what is it? I mean, it's either decoration, either means something, or represents something like, oh, that's my grandmother's portrait, or that's flying ducks, or it's an amoeba, or else it's just decoration. What are these people? Look at them. If it was one of these things like Our Town, wasn't that? You know, that a commentator comes out here on the scene, they were arguing, and he can stop them. And he suddenly shows up, and he made what amounted to an objective comment, at least compared to those two. Do you realize there are only two possibilities if there's an audience for that? The audience would get bored, lose all interest, not even hear it, because to the ordinary mind, making anything approaching an objective comment, it's just nothing. It's not entertaining. It's not exciting. It doesn't draw the mind. Only a few people in the world ever get interested in that. They would either do that, or people would not hear what he said, and they wouldn't hear it objectively. They'd go, well, what he's really doing is speaking on the other one. The point is, it would serve no purpose. So there's this continuing. It is, again, that's why I laugh. That's why I humor, if for no other reason. See, men don't really make, well, you going with that. I'm getting too far off again. But we got forever. 55 minutes of tape at a time. So we'll measure infinity. The world of man, this invented world, operationally, what I want to, now I'm going to move on, even though people do not analyze it, the mind is incapable with ordinary people of pursuing it. They can hear, somebody could sit here and hear what I have just said thus far, an ordinary person, and go, well, all right, it makes some sense what you're saying. I can follow what you mean. But, what that mean is, but it's irrelevant, or what the hell does it mean, or when are you going to get to the point? Now, I could never say, wait a minute, that was the point. Then they'd go, wait a minute, up until now you were all right. You hadn't made a point. And if I said, that's it, then they'd begin to get edgy and start leaving. They'd lose all interest. The point I wanted you to see was, even though people do not understand it, do not analyze it, the results of it, that is, of men understanding, men knowing, their minds knowing that the civilized world of man, the output of the human intellect, is extremely fragile compared to the other aspect of his life. And that it is a just house of cards doesn't begin to, it's a house of filigree. It's a life of anti-exit, what do you call it? Anorexic filigree. That's it. I like it. A gossamer house. How about that? It is a structure. I mean, it's one thing when you see an army and you see men with big old good strong rocks in their hands, or even rifles, as long as they got plenty of ammunition. That's one thing to be faced with. But to be faced with looking out upon civilization, look upon the city of Paris, Rome, to look upon your city, your concept of what civilization is, that no longer are living a feral, rooting, dirty, disgusting life out in the mud, but this life, and realize that that's some bitch. You know, I feel tremors sometimes. That to call it a thin layer, a thin veneer between being civilized and uncivilized, thin layer, you'd have to go thin, 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 thin. Which also for you, I swore I was going to stop it and go on, but for those of you who also care, look in the law throughout the world. They will always make some conditions for extremely horrendous crimes such as homicide, but they will make exceptions when the community, a jury or a judge, will decide that the man's intellect was overtaken to some understandable degree by his non-intellect. That is, normally known as crimes of passion. For years and years in the Western world, a man could get by in the United States with killing an unfaithful wife. And you can get out of homicide, that they will drop it from first-degree murder almost anywhere, that if you can show, well, it's my wife, my girlfriend, and I just pulled up to pick her up, and I saw a guy going out the back door, and before I thought, I just reached down and I picked up a brick and I hit her in the head and killed her. But they will just almost as a matter of fact drop it, because it's like, well, understandable, and even from a woman's view. That is, again, they understand that here was an ordinary guy, never been in trouble, and he suddenly killed somebody, just like had no intention to. And it's like the courts, it's like collectively humanity goes, that they realize, ooh, I'm just glad it wasn't me. But it's understandable. The guy dressed up in a suit, good job, college educated, and he kills his girlfriend just like that. And he's as amazed as anybody when it's over. That, my God, what have I done? It's like, the passions of the heart and all that. It's just the uncivilized nature of man is always right there behind the bushes. It's right there in your shorts with you. All right, now back, I was wanting to give you some more of what I was talking about last time when I started it. The men, early on, mystics, no one else does, but these mystics. The first thing, they don't understand anything. You'll never get anywhere until you realize that even the thing that seems to be the singular, the crown jewel in the existence of man, the singular aspect being his intellect, that thing is as mechanical. They don't have to know that as mechanical. They just have to realize at an early age that, by God, if there's any differences, it's almost a difference without a distinction. If the mind is any freer Because what you're faced with is this continuing battle that if you ask your mind, are you as mechanical as my liver? And of course, most people can't do it themselves, so they have to ask other people. They go around, they ask wise men, they ask their parents, they ask psychologists, priests. Is man's intellect, I just had this suspicion, is our intellect, or as they used to call it, the soul, is it as mechanical as the operations of eating food and digesting? They go, oh no. And if you say, but I get this impression, I've been observing how things work in me and other people, and by God, I'm almost convinced it is. They go, well, it's not. And if for any other reason, they will point out, again, they won't be able to analyze it, but they will point out the end result, if that were true, that the end result would be unacceptable. Therefore, people must be held accountable. Because he'd have to say, well, wait a minute, a priest would say, well, there'd be no church, there'd be no point of redemption, there'd be no chance of salvation or appeasing the gods if you could not have some freedom of will. Do we start off that in some way we offended the gods, or we wouldn't look like this, right? And everybody goes, well, well, do your own joke there. And so he says, all right, we can't change the way we look, but we can change what's in our heart. That is, what's in our higher part of our nervous system, and our soul, and our mind. We can change that, or we'd have no chance. And if you don't like that, then you could leave the priest and you could go over and see the king, or go see his prosecutor, see his prime minister, and try to talk to him from a civil view rather than a clerical view. I get this impression that man doesn't have his freedom. They go, son, that can't be true. I mean, over here we have prisons. The king has established, the state has established prisons. Hadn't you ever been mad at somebody? And you go, yeah. Have you ever been as a kid maybe so mad at somebody you could have probably hit them with a brick or a stick? And you go, well, yeah. But did you? You go, well, no. You go, all right. The people over here would not exercise that freedom of will. That's why we have to lock them up. We have to hold, you are responsible. But again, if you take this, or just what I was talking about 2 minutes ago, and you had an ordinary priest or prime minister who could suddenly think with both sides of your brain at once, he'd go, something's fishy here. Because if you see it from a third view, from a more impartial view, you can't have it both ways, and yet you can. At any rate. They have to, the mind has to, and it will, if you say, well, you're not free. And a man's mind goes, am I free? And they go, yeah. You go, no, you're not. And he goes, yes, I am. And you say, no, you're not. And he goes, yes, I am. And the whole operation is proof. Most people probably would not be glib or intelligent enough to put it that way, but that is the proof, and they're satisfied with it. If you go up to a man and you say, I've decided that a man's intellect is as just mechanical as as breathing, the circulation of blood. And once they're convinced you're serious, they go, well, that's not true. And you go, it is true. I spent my whole life studying it, and by God, it's true. And they go, no, it's not. And even if they don't choose to argue with you literally after that, they just say, well, no, it's not, and leave me alone. Their proof, their operational, non-specified, non-verbally specified proof is the fact that, in a sense, they are considering it. That you say, well, the intellect is mechanical. And man goes, there's the proof to them. If it was mechanical, it would just say no. Or if it was really mechanical, the other version, it'd say, yeah, you caught me. But it will hesitate and go, no, I'm not. You go, yeah, you are. And it gets more and more convinced. Well, no, I'm not. And if the other person was actually sharp enough, they could say, wait a minute, you got misled. Stop right now. This is the guy that you were asking the question. He'd say, all right, right now, if we were mechanical, we'd be in this argument about whether our mind is automatic and mechanical. And he went, yeah. All right, right now, can we picture, what if our mind was no more that we operate in the brain? What if we were back 150 years ago before they had done autopsies enough anyway, we got in there and it was a bunch of wires like a computer. Can you picture that? And the guy goes, yeah, I can picture that. I mean, you go, what if we opened it up and there was nothing in there? Or there's a little version of you sitting up there in your brain. Or what if there was like an infinite number of little yous up there and they were arguing about what to do, and it was just, they continually decided whether you thought this or that. And you go, yeah, I can picture that. And the guy goes, well, there you are. So you can picture being mechanical, you can picture not being mechanical. What more proof do you want? Your lungs can't do that. Your lungs can't decide, well, I'm going to quit breathing. Your lungs can't do that. And you go, yeah, that's true. But your mind can go, all right, I won't think about what I believe is true, because I believe it's true that I'm not mechanical, and this guy says I am, so I'm going to think about it a minute. Could it be mechanical? Could it just be something that... What if life is scripted and we don't know it? What if this whole thing has already been laid out and I am being operated by some kind of strange forces? Yeah, I can picture that. I mean, man's seen enough science fiction movies and stuff. I can picture that. It's not true, but I can picture it, and there's the proof. That I can consider and conceive of that which is not true. What more proof do you want? Ooh, that life is something else, people. You should know that by now. So, what I was going to get at, the next little stage, that a man, a sage, a mystic, has to see that very early, that any apparent distinction between the so-called freedom of man's intellect and the mechanical nature of his non-intellect, that if there is such a distinction or a difference, it's a difference without an operational difference. The next one I was going to suggest, I could take it several ways, but I want to hit on the right where man's mind works. And probably the best story in the West would be Socrates. And I'm going to give you a version you never heard, nobody ever thought of, what it represents. Now Socrates, what made him famous was the retellings, whether he did or Plato made it up, but let's take the figure as always as how history remembers it. That Plato and some others wrote down these long conversations that Socrates had. That Socrates would make this claim whenever asked that he didn't know anything, that he was curious, that he was still, after all these years, 60 years old, that he was still a student and was trying to learn. And so he would find himself or go seek out experts, poets, generals, painters, other philosophers, or he didn't call himself a philosopher, but he started picking out those who were leading members in all of these areas. I shouldn't have said generals, really, although he did try to discuss the nature of warfare, but what he really picked on was the area of man's intellect. You know, that he would draw these people into discussions about what is truth, what is beauty, what is the proper way to live, what is the correct use of man's mind, or his soul, his spirit, his unique talents. Have you considered what that represents from another way? As I said, you haven't, but I ask you rhetorically because he questioned a rhetorician. A member of the Rotary Club? A distributor? A linguist? But they had their own name back then. They called them, well. Have you considered, though, what this represents? The easy way that the people normally take of the Socrates story, I guess those by now who actually are professional academians in philosophy wouldn't be this crude, but most people who hear the story, the general attitude is that the man was just a troublemaker. That even if you don't take the prosecutor's view back in Athens, that he was corrupting the young by attacking the gods, and all they were saying was he was attacking the stability of Athenian society, of Greek society, civilization. But beyond all that, and beyond just saying, well, he was just a smart aleck trying to make all those guys look bad. Well, you hadn't read it and you don't understand the basis of it. Don't go read it, that wasn't the point. But what am I about to tell you that it actually represents? Well, just go ahead and tell us and be done with it. Take it easy. Take it easy. Okay, I will. I mean, Jesus, the story been laying around now, what, 2,500 years, about time somebody described it correctly for you. So anyway, I assume that all of you know enough about the Socratic dialogues and him questioning these people. And I say you don't have to read it, but I assume you do know, or those of you who read some of it, just take the way it's translated. He did not actually attack people. He just almost drove them crazy, in a sense. Well, that's not the point either, but he would ask a man, well, you are Athens' most famous romantic poet. Yes, I am. So they say. And he'd say, well, and you write about love. Yes, that is, to me, that is the human emotion. So he would start on him. Well, tell me what love is. And the guy would give him an answer. And according to all the reports, I'm just going to go ahead and tell you, anyway, if the reports are not correct, here's the way it actually went. Socrates would let the guy run on until he just ran out of something to say. Never interrupted, never argued, and said, wait a minute, stop right there. He'd ask him a simple question. Well, what is love? And the guy would either go on a paragraph or 3 pages. Not a word from Socrates. And they get through, and no smart-ass comment, no nothing. He would take something that he said about love, a new description that love is undoubtedly the supreme human emotion. He would say, when you say human emotion, can you be more specific? So then the guy'd go a paragraph for 20 pages. Not a word from Socrates, no interruptions to get through. He didn't have one critical comment. The guy then had described the human emotions as that which separates the soul of man. That is that which gives man a soul, whereas the lesser animals who do not have true emotions do not have. And he said soul. And he said, well, when you say soul, what is the soul of man? So it would go on and on and on and on and on. What does that represent from the analyzation I'm about to whip upon you? Shortly after all mystics realized the mechanical, non-personal nature of human consciousness, just as mechanical as any other aspect of existence. Shortly after that, they must move on to another level. That is, they realized that talk, while important, is basically nonsensical. They understand that the world of man, I bypassed that they have to go through realizing that the civilized world is an invented. I just kind of jumped that. The civilized world, you understand, also cannot exist without speech. If there's some way that humans developed an intellect and no speech, we would not be where we are. You can try and think about it, that we could have been mute and still in some way developed, but no. Speech. You had to have speech. So very shortly after their first realization about the mechanical nature of human consciousness, as mechanical as everything else, they realized then that civilization, as fragile as it seems to be, but anyway, civilization, the world of man as opposed to the world of non-thinking creatures, is based upon speech. Is nothing without speech, would not exist without speech, is totally dependent upon speech. Speech taken from civilization, civilization collapses. The air is let out. They understood that, but then they listened, and I wrote a news item for you about a week ago, if anybody were listening, anyone was listening, that said that if you actually listen to what people are saying, most of it actually doesn't make any sense. You are so used to it, and I'm not going to start picking up because it's not a criticism. But about the only exceptions are people who speak publicly for a living nowadays, and that's about limited to politicians, and of course they're usually wired up to be somewhat of masterful and being able to be literate sounding while saying nothing. So it's almost a perfect example that is non-exemplary. But at any rate, if you just listen to people talk, you're so used to it you're not aware of it. And what I'm about to say, if an ordinary person would listen to this, they'd go, wait a minute, you're some kind of damn fanatic about the English language, since we're here in Jutland speaking English. But that's not it. But if you listen, not only do people speak in fractured sentences, but if you just listen, other than grunts and points and yeah, no, hey, all right. Of course, again, the cliches, and you're used to it. It's just almost a verbal sign language. Hey, you know what I mean? Hey, you got it. Yeah. And you thought, what does this mean? Of course, if you're in the middle of it, by then you know it means something. Well, it is a form of speech in a sense. But what I want you, if you just listen to people talk, talk is important. Like I said, without talk, civilization, the air would quickly dispense therefrom. So talk is important, but it is basically nonsensical. That is, or basically meaningless. That if you listen to people that will actually spread out a sentence, that actually try to say something, and this does not exclude politicians, I'm just trying to say that there are a few people that do put together sentences, and I guess there are probably people now who are, well, at any rate. If you just listen to ordinary people, and they start to say something, they say, well, you know what I think about what's going on with the monetary system, or what's going on with the conflict between the Serbs and the Croats, or whatever's going on, and you listen to it, you can take, they'll speak in one long sentence. But if you take the whole sentence, that it seemed to be something, they say, well, here's what I think as far as that conflict, and you go in and you listen, by the time the sentence is through, remember, this is just us talking, so do I have to keep telling you this is not an attack on people? Because it's getting to a better point. But if you actually stop the sentence and you listen to it, it is actually meaningless. Most of the time, if you take the full context, the full sense of what they said, oftentimes they'll start out and say, well, here's what my belief's always been, and you hear what they stated, and within 30 seconds, they've taken a reverse position. Or else they stated, well, now here's what I think should happen, or here's what I predict is going to happen, and for very good reason, and it starts out, it's like they're naming reasons whether you agree, and some of the reasons turn into something else. It sounds like the tail end recipe of sticky buns, or it just... All right. If you listen to life, except under the most, if you listen to life in general, most of what people say doesn't make sense. Not by my definition. You can take any well, if you hear it, you'll know what I mean. I thought there for a minute. I was back filming for the public. I was about to preach. Don't listen to me. You people are supposed to know. If you just start listening to life, and it just goes on so continually, but here's the point. People are speaking almost gibberish. Continually. And here's the point. So what? What difference does it make? None. And yet all you got to do is listen. Just listen. Just to the grocery store. Just listen to some little something. You're so used to it. Plus the operation of the output is such that it makes you ignore what happens. It's like me saying that men understand, they fear for the stability of civilization, man's invented world. Although they don't analyze it, the output, they understand it because look at the output, how protective, how defensive men are about matters intellectual. You understand? Is that the realization is with man, because it's coming through life, of course, and it's like saying, well, if this is not true, men are pretending it is. If somebody told me, if they heard what I just said in the last 30 minutes and said, all right, even if you're wrong, that civilization, this invented thing as you call it from man's mind, is so fragile that it's just the thinnest of veneers, and that men, even though they don't think about it and don't analyze it, they realize it. Even if you're wrong, then I got to admit this, they could say to me, the way they act, it might as well be true. You understand? That's one thing that you should be able to use that for yourself for a while. That you can look and take the way people act. If you got nothing else to do with your mind, if you're just kind of standing around, you don't know what else to do, and you look at some area that's always bugged you, or something that your mind always has a negative reaction. Anyway, something to catch your attention, and you always thought, I could never understand why people would do such and such. Why individuals, or why groups of people would operate in this manner, it's beyond understanding. Look upon what it is that you find to be the output, that is the thing that you're finding fault with, that you're finding disbelief with, then move backwards from that. That there it is, here they're doing something. Whatever it is, they're engaged in some kind of activity that you look at and you go, it's beyond me. Look at the activity and then try to move backward and say, what could possibly make somebody act like that? And it's always just simple as shit. Simple as duck shit even. Not even some kind of, not elephant or something, just simple. You can take, as going on, what I started to say, you can listen to people talk, checkout line at a grocery store. And a cashier, and I don't have anything in mind, I just got to stand here and make it up, but trying to ring up stuff and it doesn't work on the bar reader, and they pick it up and she'll say something like, and you hear a piece like, price of fruit that is anybody, and the guy's saying, well, yesterday, but then so it was 20. And finally maybe the cashier go, well, change, is it Washington maybe? And they go, well, 89, I think it was 89. She said, well, 89? Well, would somebody go check? And you think, well, they've been standing there, two grown people, and they're looking at each other, and apparently they think something's flowing back and forth. Of course, if you're an ordinary observer and prone to criticism, what you want to say is they believe information is passing back and forth, and they're wrong. Nuh-uh, you're wrong. The information is passing back and forth. But if you listen to the talk, the information is talk. But if you look at the content and look at it, it's what I told you, Most of it is gibberish. Well, that's crude. Most of it is nonsensical. If you take out what happened, one of their lines, or take out the full context that the cashier and the guy stood there talking about that bag of apples, altogether, both of them, you wrote out as a dialogue, and it took 30 seconds. And you put it on paper, and you looked at it, you go, what in the hell is this? You might realize, well, it was something to do with the price of apples, but if you looked at each sentence, and there, one went, and one went, well, ding, 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 ding. And you say, what happened? The man ended up with his apples. The store got some kind of money. He walked out eating an apple. The next person came up. And yet if you look, and the talk was important. He would have never gotten out of there with the apples for his grocery period were it not for talk. But if you look at what the talk actually conveyed, as an ordinary man would, like, well, something's got to be going on here. Yeah, but you don't know what it is. Because if you stop and look at it, you go, wait a minute, that makes no sense. But it worked. That, I was going to suggest, is one of the next possible describable stages that a mystic must realize. Or he does realize. He doesn't must. He does. That here it is, civilization. Of course, civilization's important or it wouldn't be here. But the thing that holds together civilization, the thing without which civilization would cease to exist, is talk. And then you look at talk, and you realize, well, talk, there's nothing any more important, not to just survival physically, but to the survival of man as this singular creature, that is civilization. There's nothing more important than talk. So there's the first part of my news item. Do you remember that, or my comment that talk is important? Dash. But basically nonsensical. Because all you got to do is listen. And even though you may know, like my little made up scene, that you knew that little conversation was the cashier didn't know the price of apples, and they didn't have a sticker, so it wouldn't ring up the barcode reader. And so she was asking him, apparently, I don't know whether she's going to take his word for it, if he said, well, they're a dime a pound. At least she said, well, do you know what these are? And he went, well, and he mentioned some price. It sounded like he was referring to last week or yesterday, but he didn't. He went 80, and maybe he was saying 89 cents a pound. And you could pick out pieces, but if you look at each sentence and look at the whole thing as being a scene from a play, that those 4 or 5 lines of dialogue put together on one page, and you read it through, you get the general sense, well, they're discussing the price of apples. And suddenly at the end it goes, ring. Did she hit the cash register? And you still don't know what the hell happened. And yet the guy walked out, handed her some money, she gave him back change, he walks out eating an apple. And you think, what does it mean? It was important, but what went on was almost nonsensical. I was going to suggest, now to get around to it, or to tell you that an analyzation that's never been used on Socrates, and there's another story in China, but one at a time's enough. Do you realize what he was doing then on that basis? Or could have been doing? He was doing one of these non-abrasive, one of these non-critical, poking the holes in life, or as I call it, sort of detailing a picture of life in a way that you had never considered. Whether it did any good for the people involved, the poets and etc., is another story, of course. No, it's not. It's no story at all, but that's a figure of speech. See, it sounded important, but it was meaningless. But at least I stopped and backed up and pointed out to you it's meaningless. That's not another story. There's not another story there. I can tell you now, they benefited nothing from it. As a matter of fact, if you remember, they invited the man to drink hemlock for his efforts. And he went, well, fuck you, all right, I will. I realize, 65 years of talking to you motherfuckers, and this is the reward you invite me to either shut up or drink poison. After seeing the degree of success I've had here, bring me the hemlock. And adios. That's another story. No, it's not. Yes, it is. But you realize what he was doing, if you want to take it my way now. It'd have to be a mystic hearing about this later or reading it. What better? Well, anyway, it's a perfect example of him showing the folly of language. And there has never been anyone, no ordinary person, that's ever analyzed, and that's considered one of the pillars of Western literature, Western history, especially Western thought. Even those people who don't know much about it will continually refer to some about our great Socratic history. Just a vaguest notion. Anyway, the man has been remembered as much as anybody in history, but nobody ever thought about this. Wait a minute. He was trying to make people realize that they do not have a firm grasp on exactly what love is, or that people will make harsh judgments and say, oh, I know what beauty is. Some sculptor, and Socrates says, well, I've been looking for you everywhere. Describe it to me. I keep hearing people talk about beauty, and what is it? And an ordinary person, well, he's trying to show that one man's idea of beauty is not necessarily another man's. Boy, that took a genius. That way they have done everything in the world except the one thing. All he did was point out that talk is very important. We would not be sitting here at this banquet here in Athens. We would not be out of the caves. We'd be no better off than Germans. Everybody picked on Germans even back then. So he'd say we'd just be brutes and barbarians if were it not for talk. And all the painters and everybody laying there on their divans, eating grapes and trying to fondle noble young maidens. Anyway, them saying, well, here we are talking about what seems to be important matters. See? Because talk's important. And they went, yes. And he said, well, I'm delighted to be in the company of important people. People involved in important things. I mean, farmers are important, other people, but we're talking about civilization. The kinds of things that people of our ilk lay around here and nibble grapes and women and discuss art, beauty, philosophy. And they go, yes. So he says, and you're considered Greek's leading expert in beauty, or what it was. And they go, well, they say so. And so Socrates starts on him. Gives him free rein. Ask him a question, let him run till he runs out, then ask him another one. Let him run till he runs out. What's he showing? That talk is important, but basically it's just bullshit. And they sit right there and put up with it for 65 years until they finally kind of collectively thought, you know, fuck that old man, he's driving us crazy. He wasn't driving them crazy. It was like, you know, I don't think about, you know, the kind of stuff he asked me anymore. Let's invite him to leave. You know, we thought he'd die by now. Because I know it's an offshoot and off the subject, but I still like the added benefit of his wife, that Socrates attributed everything to her, that she was supposed to be a bigger pain in the ass than him, not philosophically, just a general pain in the ass. And I think he attributed that not only to his wisdom, but for making him live that long. But he was, you know, I think just determined to outlive her. I was thinking about those drinking banquets in Athens and then sclerosis, but you can also take, I was dragging in some of the other stories. I was going to get around to some of the earlier things I had done with people when I did this. Well, let me jump to that so we get some of it tonight. I was pointing out last time I wrote some books, and when I started doing this, I ran some ads, put out some flyers, and I picked out what I was basically using was an offshoot of some of the Sufis and the groundwork that people assumed that this guy Gurdjieff had done, that had no religious trappings, and back then nobody ever heard of Sufism in the West to speak of. Now it too has too many apparent associative thoughts, ordinary people, to the religion of Islam. But at any rate, I did vague things, plays on words. But then to try and talk to people, as soon as they would show up, and they'd say, "Wait a minute, so you got something to do with Gurdjieff?" No, I just, you know, I put that to see who would show up. I was a little better than that. Even I knew better than that, because people won't put up with that. People don't feel like they've been fooled right off the bat. So you had to, you know, sit them down, give them a cup of coffee, and, you know, ask them, "How you doing? You know, tell me something about yourself." You had to do that before you'd ever let them know that, no, this got nothing to do with Gurdjieff. So you understand, first off, you've got to attract people. And one more time, this is not anything to do with me personally, that mystics, the kind of activity, the work itself, this kind of activity has to attract people, but it has to use words. Because there is no work, there is no mystical activity without an intellect. There's no physical mystical activity going on. To the body, mystical activity is the brain. If the body was conscious and could talk, the body would look up at the brain, and it wouldn't need, you know, pictures of Jesus on black velvet from Tijuana. That is mysticism. It truly is. It is completely beyond its scope. Plus, it is an advancement over this. It's not a replacement. And when I say an advancement, it's no offense to this, of course. It is a continuing of evolution. of where the lungs, the stomach, everything about man somatically, man physically, extended, and this thing got stronger and stronger. But with words, the activity itself, this kind of stuff, has to deal in words. And so, in a sense, if the work was a thing, if this kind of activity was an actual thing and had a life, that would be like I was. It'd be like Jesus or Muhammad or anybody. That they would have had to go, attention, anybody, if you're not doing anything, are you interested in hearing something new? And they stop and say, okay, what? You have to use some sort of words that make sense at that time and place. To where people go, ah. And normally what you do, I mean, it's just, you don't have to be a genius again to do this. As soon as I say it, you'll think, well, that's true. A Muhammad, a Buddha. Buddha had to start off, he didn't just say, hey, I got a brand new message. I got something you never heard. Now, a few people show up, a few avant-garde artists between paintings. But ordinary people, if you said, something you've never heard, they got no interest in it. They go, wait a minute, it's going to be some of that Ornette Coleman music or some crap. So, now, what you have to do, you have to say, all right, all you people, anybody who's interested in the spiritual development of man, would you gather around? So they gather around. And he says, all right, now all of you, I assume you're all good Hindus. And I went, yes. And am I assuming that some of you feel as though you have not received the full information of what you've sought out of the religions we practice it? And they went, yes. They go, all right. What I have realized, I've been, as you guys know, some of you know, I've been pursuing all of the various Hindus, the disciplines, the various cults, and what we know you have, we've heard about you, and go, all right. What I've done is I've sort of extended it. Or sometimes they'll say, I've seen where it went astray. I've seen what was lacking. And so people go, oh, okay. And they might pull up a chair, pull up a rock, and go, okay. In other words, he's taking something that's known and saying, all right, I believe now I see how we can carry this further. I can make it more personally applicable. How I can make it more useful. And people go, okay. But pretty soon, if they're going to get anywhere, they got to get over that. It's almost impossible to make somebody get over it. I have, for the last several years, tried in a backhanded way to try and make you get over it without telling you what I was doing. But it's almost like never stopping anywhere, or it sounds like I'm talking about one thing and then talk about something else. And even make sounds. Oftentimes make these little stories. I'd normally, if you notice, now that I tell you, I guess you'll notice, but I made these I'd make up scenes that one guy went up to another guy, or a monk went up, or a man went up to a mystical master and asked him some question. And sometimes the scene would sound as though even the guy involved, the mystical master, would end up making some joke like, this doesn't actually exist. Why is it so hard to understand this? And the mystical master said, have you ever tried to understand something that didn't exist? Then I'd go on to the next page. But if you listen a certain way, you could take it as being an attack. You could take it as, wait a minute, he's just trying to point out, if you're an ordinary person, you could say, well, he's trying to point out that there is no such thing as mysticism. Oh, yes, there is. But that ain't it. What? Yes. Well, all right, well, don't start that crap, all right. You would have no idea, even though no one can do this for you, and even though the talk is ultimately nonsensical and meaningless, were it not for someone else, were it not for talk, you would not even have any notion, no suspicion of where you have itched. So even though no one else can do it for you, no one else, there is no, not in any meaningful sense, there is no real baraka of some mystical person putting their hand on you or in some way leaving you a drop of their blood or their skull and you can hold it and it brings you power. God, that were true, we'd all be in business, would we not? Well, I'd be in business because I'd be selling you my blood. Well, you wouldn't know. I'd get somebody else's, but anyway. But nah, I have to keep doing those damn sheetrocking. But even though talk is meaningless, and even though no one else can do this for you, period, do you realize if someone else didn't, if it didn't start out and you feel like that you had met someone who could, that would have some specific effect. Somebody knew what it was, and just by being around them is going to help, and especially what they could tell you. And so you've already crossed over both of the knots already. That is, that you assume. Now, I understand it. That you assume that just by being associated with somebody that's involved with it, it will eventually, if I just act decently, if I just kind of keep my mouth shut and hang around, it'll finally have an effect on me. And on top of that, as long as he's going to talk, then what he talks about is always about this, and so there's something in there. He may even slip up and slip in the secret and hide it and all that kind of stuff. But see, you've already passed the two things. That nobody can do it for you, and talk is basically meaningless. But you wouldn't even be sitting here now. You or anybody would have never gotten on it. Were it not for those same two things that are ultimately futile. Does anybody begin to sense any method over my last couple of years to what appeared to be no method? See, there is no standard method for operating without a method. It's not unknown. I don't mean by any means I'm the only person that ever realized this. In fact, I assume some of you are well read enough, and I've even pointed out, it's normally attributed now in the West to the Zen school, which for all intents and purposes, we'll say originally was a mystical effort of a kind, that they come the closest. Well, verbally they seem to do when you read the descriptions. Any kind of closed monastery wherein talk is either forbidden or at a bare minimum is getting close to it. But Zen even throws in an additional thing. You understand, even Christian monasteries, they're getting a little close to it being no method. They won't let it go at that. Then you got to go in, you got to read the damn Bible, 20 hours a day. You got to get in some position and do, prayer beads or pray to a symbol. So they get you off there. If they would just say, all right, you want to know what it is? You want to know what Jesus knew? And you go, yeah. And they say, all right, come in here. Leave everything you own out there. Just come on in here and shut up. And do whatever everybody is doing. You see something needs to be done, do it, but shut up. All right? You go, okay. That'd be closer. But who's going to do that? Nobody. If you say, well, let me ask one question. They go, no. Either come in or leave. And you go, just one question. Of course, your question wants to be, is this going to do me any good? And if they knew what they're doing, they'd kick you in your private parts and heave you out. They wouldn't wait for you to go. Is it going to do you any good? Yeah. You'd be out of there. The Zen, the way it's described, they throw in, I'm going to quit, don't worry about the tape. They throw in the added part, the same thing of secluding oneself and then basically silence. But then on top of that, then they throw in the stories of once a year or whenever that they let the people ask the monk, the head of the lodge, a question, and his answer makes about as much sense as you took my last couple of years of running commentaries, and you tried to put them all in some coherent form. Now, taken individually every night and over a long range, well, but if you tried to put them all suddenly, if I died and you just said, well, I'm going to make a buck out of this if nothing else, and you're going to turn it into the new intelligence or, the me mystical school, and you thought, well, I'm going to take the last couple of years, all the good tapes, and that's some neat stuff, and I'm going to, he never would do it. I'd put in some codified, I'll systematize it. No, you won't. You'd look like an idiot. Of course, that might be a good thing. If I die soon, maybe some of you should try that. That might enlighten you. That after you wrestle with all that, and you're up to your ass in these tapes and trying to transcribe all these papers, it'd be in the, what, by now, 100,000, 200,000 of pages, and you keep thinking, I will put in some form, it might finally, when you're about to go crazy and you hadn't been out of the house in years, that it might finally strike you while you're having so much trouble trying to shuffle and fit on, that it might finally be, maybe in the death I'll finally succeed. And something besides smelling bad and rotting. At least one more night. I'm going to do this Wednesday. Don't you like all my warnings every night about, well, now I'm going to talk about what I did, so we don't take it personally, so the new people in other cities? And spend what, maybe 3 minutes?